We've referred to the Session Border Controller, the SBC, many times already in the course, and by now you'll already be aware that it sits at the network edge, controlling in- and outbound voice-over IP traffic, protecting the private network from external abuse and attack. All of that's true. In this lesson, we'll look in more depth at Session Border Controllers. Before we start, it's important to note that there's no standard SBC definition, no RFC or anything that defines what an SBC should do and how it should do it. It's more of a notion, an ideal that's then implemented by different vendors in different ways. In fact, each SBC vendor differentiates its SBC product by its particular set of features. Accordingly, in this lesson, we'll discuss 20 points, 20 features or characteristics that may be implemented in today's Session Border Controllers. Remember, not all SBCs will implement all of the features in the way we'll describe or enjoy all of the characteristics. It's also likely, as time goes on, that there'll be new additional features that I've not yet described. Okay, point 1. The session in Session Border Controller refers to a communication session, inferring that SBCs focus on session-related voice-over IP traffic, not other general IP traffic. Although the word session fits nicely with the Session Initiation Protocol, SIP, other voice-over IP protocols will also use SBCs, including H323 and MGCP. Now, those implementations will of course be different, but the characteristics will be the same. Point 2. Session Border Controllers sit literally at the network edge. They'll probably have multiple network interface cards, each with their own IP addresses. One externally facing with a public IP connecting to the wider network, and the other internally facing with a private IP connecting to the private internal network. It's literally the border between these two networks. Traffic comes in through the external NIC, is processed by the SBC, and sent internally through the internal NIC. Point 3. Session Border Controllers are typically back-to-back user agents. You'll remember from one of the previous lessons that B2B UAs sit between two sessions, acting as user agent servant for one session and user agent client for the other. Because it's literally a SIP endpoint for both upstream and downstream sessions, it has absolutely no obligations from one side to the other, and is therefore completely free to copy or not to copy content between up and downstream messages as it sees fit. Receiving an outbound invite, for example, it acts as endpoint user agent server. The invite itself is not proxied on downstream. Instead, the SBC B2B UA creates a brand new request on the other side with a brand new call ID, contact and via headers, choosing to copy perhaps only the request URI and the to and the from headers, each with their public AORs. You'll note even that the new contact and via addresses are set to the Session Border Controller's external public-facing IP address. Sound familiar? The translating of internal to external addresses? Indeed, network address translation. In fact, that's point 4. Session Border Controllers typically perform network address translation, both enabling interaction between external phones and multiple internal phones, each with their own private IP address. SBC network address translation automatically serves a nice security benefit, that of topology hiding, hiding the addresses of internal servers and phones. With topology hiding, no one outside the network can dig around inside the SIP messages for internal IP addresses of any of the clients or servers for purposes of hacking in with malicious intent. So a back-to-back user agent takes input from one side, does some processing in the middle, and sends output on the other. Most of the remaining SBC features relate to the does some processing in the middle bit. That is, how it manipulates things between receiving and dispatching a request. Encryption, for example. Point 6. SIP networks often like to offload the resource-intensive TLS encryption of SIP messages out to the session border controller. Nowadays, they'll often have dedicated hardware to cope with this TLS encryption. SBCs also perform SIP normalization. That's point 7. As much as we like to think SIP from all vendors use the prescribed SIP syntax, sometimes they don't. Maybe this gateway absolutely needs the user agent header, crashing if it receives a request without it. Although SIP says this should never happen, as all entities should both adhere to the spec and be tolerant of things they don't understand, often in implementation it's not so. So, to help out, SBCs might perform SIP normalization, looking for specific known inconsistencies in message format and modifying those messages before they cause a problem. Perhaps adding in that user agent header that the gateway so desperately needs. Some SBCs offer protocol translation. That's point 8. Not usually between SIP and SS7 for the PSTN. Well, I'm not aware of any SBCs that are also PSTN gateways, but there could be. But between SIP and other IP protocols, such as H323, receiving perhaps a SIP message on one side and converting it to the equivalent H323 message on the other. Newer SBCs might also translate between SIP and WebRTC, enabling calls from SIP clients direct to the browser with no special download or browser plugin. Another thing an SBC might do, for point 9, is manage IP4, IP6 interworking. Now, as we move gradually from IP4 to IP6, session border controllers might ensure inbound and outbound messages have the desired IP version. For example, imagine the internal network still uses IP4 and an external message arrives with an IP version 6 address. Well, the SBC might perform a kind of IP version network address translation, replacing the source IP version 6 address with the SBC's own internal IP version 4 address, mapping the translation as it does so, ready to reset the version 6 address in outgoing responses. A major function of all SBCs is to protect the internal network, including suppressing denial of service attacks. That's point 10. Remember how denial of service is suppressed by monitoring the rate of packets from each IP address and discarding packets when the quantity received exceeds a given threshold. SBCs often protect against DOS attacks. It will often be an SBC that authenticates the external user. Point 11. Challenging with a 407 proxy authentication required response, only permitting the call if the subsequent invite contains the correct checksummed nonce, password and realm. Although not defined by RFC 3261, some SBCs can add a P-asserted identity header, asserting to downstream servers the caller has been challenged and his identity successfully authenticated. Increasingly, telephone service providers and enterprise networks alike are required by governments to provide lawful interception. That's point 12. The ability for security services to tap or eavesdrop on conversations. Accordingly, some SBCs have the option to modify the SDP connection addresses to force media streams through some special media gateway from where it's easy to silently listen in and perhaps even record conversations. Talking of legal matters, emergency calling is becoming an issue. Again, governments may require that emergency calls are prioritized over other general calls. Here, SBCs monitor the calls in the queue, pulling out any marked as emergency to the top and handling them first. I saw a promo video on YouTube the other day that described how a particular SBC, when processing an emergency call, used some special technique to give the caller's actual address, his geographical location, to the emergency services, meaning they know automatically where the emergency is taking place. Now, I'm not sure how it does it, but it's certainly a differentiator. Session border controllers can play a major role in quality of service, ensuring that precious bandwidth is used appropriately, perhaps by manipulating codec offerings in the SDP. Imagine an invite offering both high quality, bandwidth intensive video and lower quality, less bandwidth intensive video. Well, an SBC might be configured to watch for this and simply take out any bandwidth hungry offers, leaving only the possibility of a low bandwidth call. It might also perform a type of call omission control, that's point 15, where when upstream or downstream traffic is about to exceed acceptable thresholds, well, additional calls are rejected, maintaining the bandwidth for the existing calls. Rather than pushing media out to a media gateway, like I mentioned a moment ago, some of the latest SBCs offer built-in media services controlling not only the signaling, but also the media streams. For example, an SBC might act as a network address translating topology hiding media gateway, point 16, inserting its public address in the SDP on one side and its internal private address on the other, causing then both parties to send audio to the SBC itself. It then network address translates the media packets, swapping over internal and external addresses before forwarding the packets on. This way, neither party ever get to know the actual IP address of the other, even when interrogating the media packets. Moving on another step from media address translation, SBCs might also perform media transcoding, point 17, translating between otherwise incompatible codecs, translating perhaps from VP8 to H.264 video, for instance. Such SBCs typically have dedicated digital signal processors, especially for the purpose. Some SBCs might offer IVR type capability, the option of playing audio prompts, collecting DTMF, and then making choices depending on user input. Now, being the single point of entry through which all SIP traffic is routed, and perhaps media traffic, the SBC is an obvious point for collecting statistics. Some SBCs report things like number of calls made, the average duration, the longest, the shortest call, failed calls, and so on and so on. And at last, point 20, session border controllers are typically call stateful, meaning that they hold call state throughout the whole call, not just during call setup, but until the call tears down. Now, this makes it a really good point for generating billing records. So some SBCs generate CDRs that can be then used to compile billing records. Okay, so in summary, remember, SBCs sit at the network edge, controlling, policing in and outbound traffic, protecting the inner network from malicious abuse, and providing additional services. There's no one set of features you'll find in every SBC. Rather, each vendor builds their SBC product with the features it thinks will generate the most sales. Here's a reminder of common SBC features. Remember, the list will probably grow as vendors think of new ideas.